Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today with 11 little details that you may have missed during Dying Light 2's big gameplay drop. You know, those tiny things that overall round out the product and get us more excited for it because of all that attention to detail, and just those things that you can easily overlook in exchange for the big things happening on screen. Now, I've been following this game for a while, ever since we saw Chris Avellone hit the stage and announce this title, which I was like, what? One of the fathers of Fallout is helping out with the story for this game? And then afterwards, I got to sit down with the developers and talk about the game in an interview, which I'll have linked down below. So I've been closely following this game, and to see a really significant look at it put out to the public, which I did not get to see at this year's E3 because I did not attend, is really exciting. I also want to note a little fun fact that within a short 2-week span of time, we hilariously learned that Dead Island 2 has been passed to technically its 4th developer, but we're also seeing 26 minutes of the incredible looking Dying Light 2. So can we just compliment Techland for knowing what they were working with there and getting the heck out of there at just the right time? Anyway, you're here for little details, so let's get it started with detail number 1, which is pretty in your face, but given the exchange happening with the narrative and trying to get your feet wet with that, I can understand why it may have been overlooked, which is all the people you can interact with, which are marked with question marks, and Shot 2 supports that because we see our character approach someone, we still see that question mark there, and we can hold X to talk to them. And I think this is important to note because this means the game is telling you who you can talk to, and I don't know about you guys, but it kind of reminds me of Far Cry, where they always have little markers over their head with people you can just exchange with in brief dialogue. I personally always like the idea of approaching them and seeing if they're willing to converse in that moment of discovery when they maybe have a quest for me. But anyway, let's move on to what isn't a little detail, just something that I found particularly impressive, which is in this shot right here, where we can see all the clutter on the street, and that's a lot of assets to load in. And when you also consider on top of that all of the buildings that you could break into and all of the things happening in the world, it's really impressive what's in this world, and I do hope that's representative of the final product. Anyway, back to the little details. Number 2 is physically activating your mods on weapons during combat. This is something we have not seen in Dying Light previously. Normally in Dead Island or the original Dying Light, you would acquire a weapon mod, you would use your components to craft it at a bench and attach it to, for example, a tire iron, and then that tire iron would receive attributes like electric damage or fire damage and maybe some buffs and bonuses to it, but it was never in a situation where you could flick it on with a switch and all of a sudden electricity is running through your weapon. Now, what this excites me about is the potential of enemies having weaknesses, where you can have your machete out, you can be using that for enemies, and then you approach someone who's weaker to electricity, you flip the switch on, you use it on them, and all of a sudden it's a whole different story. And also it could be for when enemies are resistant to a type of element, you can turn it off so that weapon's still relevant to you in combat and you don't have to constantly switch, which I think is really good. Now, back to a not so little detail, just a little bit of conversation, is on the first major story choice where we're told whether we can chase the truck or stay with Frank. And I just want to mention that there is a timer for every choice that's made there, and throughout this entire demo there's never more than 2 choices per moment, which I think is important to note because that means the story's a little more contained and that you're going to see a lot more branching narratives in turn if that's truly what they're actually going for, which it seems to be based off what I've seen at E3 2018 and what we've all seen together here from E3 2019. The reason this is the case is because if you have, for example, 4 options per choice, that's a lot more to control in the terms of a branching narrative than if you have 2 which go on their own diverging paths. So it's just something worth keeping in mind. Anyway, detail number 3 is the locale information on the bottom right corner. We can see at one point it mentions that we're at the Canteen Garden, which means that we're still part of that whole bar area that we were in at the starting point when we go all the way up to the top of this building, which means settlements, outposts really span a lot wider than I think a lot of us originally imagined. And also we see the mention of no man's land when we enter what is the open world space. So it always lets you know where you are, and there's a little compass on the top. Which, speaking of which, brings us to detail number 4, which is marking world activities with the binoculars, kind of reminiscent actually of Breath of the Wild. There's 2 aspects in this part of the gameplay that remind me of Breath of the Wild, which we'll get into. So you'll see a group of bandits, and once they're fully registered, an icon with an exclamation point is going to appear on the map bar on the top, likely suggesting that this is something you could clear out for maybe a total completion run, or maybe you just take them out and that's it, that's all there is to it. What's really Breath of the Wild reminiscent of this is not only the marking with your binoculars and seeing the map update through that binocular system, but also that he uses a hang glide afterwards to go from one rooftop to the next. It's clear the inspiration was there, and I think it's a great open world title to take inspiration from. Anyway, moving on to detail number 5, which is setting the tone of the world a little bit. It's something I picked up on, and it's possible I'm looking a little too deep into this one, but still I think a lot of you will find it interesting. So we see the main protagonist do one of the coolest drop kicks of all time into a zombie, and he knocks him out of a boarded window, which, oh my god, that's got to be the most satisfying thing to pull off. But only do we see right after that, right across from us, is a small survivor's outpost. And I thought that this sort of solidified how dangerous the humans are, because this whole demo starts off with a human conflict, and this seems to be the safest place away from humans, especially if they're camping out right next door to a bunch of zombies. I wonder if it's one of those worlds sort of like The Walking Dead, where eventually they accept, okay, zombies exist in this world, now it's about the humans who live in it. I just thought it was an interesting thing to note, and may just be something I'm looking a little deep into. Detail number 6 is the rising of the infection rate and its visual representation. So there's one point in this demo where we do fall into what's called a dark zone, and what happens is that once we're in there, on screen we'll see a golden circle gradually depleting, and this gradual depletion is also represented on our wristwatch, which is on the left wrist. When the circle is depleted by a quarter, we can only see 1 red button and 3 green ones. When it's at half, critical immunity appears on the screen, and we can see 2 red buttons and 2 green ones on our wrist. Now, when our protagonist escapes from this dark zone and engages in combat later on in the demo, we can clearly see that the monitor on his wrist has returned to normal. So when you're in these dark zones, you have a time limit to either get out of there or complete whatever missions you have in there, which I think can add to some gameplay tension if you have quests placed inside the dark zone. So long as it's not a checklist objective, I think that these can be really interesting parts of the world that add a lot more tension than just simple combat could. Little detail number 7 is when we get to this giant fortress, and I noticed that there are UV light posts. Now, we learned also in the dark zone that the UV knocks zombies back and halts them from any kind of action or attacking, and I thought it was really neat to see that Outpost had taken that creation that defends them from zombies at point blank range and used it to decorate their outpost in a way to keep the folks safe there, because one of the interesting parts of this demo was approaching what seemed to be a double-crossing villain and hearing children laughing and playing in complete happiness and joy, and you're like, what? Isn't this some type of really sad world? Aren't these people bad? Why are there kids that are happy here? And to see the UV light post sort of there protecting that type of peace was, I think, a really big tone setter as well. Detail number 8. Now, while the ramifications and presentation is anything but little, it's front and center actually. I want to talk about the 2 types of choice and consequence present in this demo. One is narratively driven, where you either stay with Frank or chase the truck, as I mentioned earlier. We learn the repercussions of our decision to ditch Frank near the mission's end, as we are presented with another decision with the Colonel, either siding with him or your friend Matt, who sent you to this place in the first place. Our decision to turn on the pumps leads to a part of the city draining, unlocking new quests and areas to explore, yet also threatening the peace and prosperity of the location that we're currently in, which is awesome stuff. Now, the other level of choice and consequence is a little bit more superficial, I'd call it, which is where we're given the choice of hijacking the vehicle or threatening Steve. But that's why I want to talk about it. At the end of the day, either choice we make brings us to the same place, albeit in a different manner. One probably results in a little more guns blazing, one results in stealth gameplay. But this is a choice that just overall impacts the gameplay. And this is prevalent in all RPGs, even some of the greatest, like Divinity Original Sin 2, KOTOR, The Witcher 3, and the list goes on. I just want to make sure folks are aware, simply because I see a lot of trailers and gameplay footage acting like each and every choice you make is quite literally earth-shattering, when realistically it's not. And by the way, that is okay, because it allows the world to have a set of rules, and for those rules to be broken in certain ways, and for the story to react in specific ways that make it satisfying to go back time and time again. So it's totally okay that it's that way. I just want to make sure folks are aware with the way the choices are presented that not each one of those has significant branching ramifications. I can tell you that right off the bat. It's just how games are made. Anyway, now we move on to detail number 9, which is time-sensitive quests being in this game. So at one point when we leave to go chase the truck, we are assigned with a quest to find Frank a doctor, and we did not do that in this demo before chasing the truck, and so you fail the mission and it's gone forever because he too is gone forever. Now maybe it's because it was tied to the story that's there, but I do like the idea in a world where resources are thin, movement is everything, that maybe you have some time-sensitive quests that try to engage that sense of urgency, but in the terms of something that's narratively driven, where it's presenting you with a very tight, realistic choice. Do I go and save my friend right now and find a doctor, but then I lose sight of the truck and we can't find out where those people are and seek out our vengeance? Like, which way do I go? And you have to make that momentary choice very snappy. Like, I think that type of stuff is really engaging. So I like that they tied this into the main story personally. I'll be curious to see if that pops up at all in side quests. Detail number 10 brings us into combat, where we're fighting a giant brute-like figure, and combat dodging has a lot of different ways to go about it. We have the backstep, we have sidestepping, and then more importantly is what I noted, a lower sidestep where you sort of go underneath a horizontal swing. I thought this was quite interesting because it gives combat a couple of bit of layers, and that's probably one of the weaker aspects of Dying Light, so to speak, because it's more about the customization and the cool things you create and how you can use parkour, and less about the actual sidestepping, dodging, and all that type of stuff. So I'm happy to see them evolve that aspect of the gameplay too, because it makes it a little bit better. And now, for our final detail, number 11 is the stamina versus the door. So there's a point inside the dark zone where we see our character trying to push open the door, and their stamina bar depletes very fast and he can't open it. And this is likely a decision impacted based off how you upgrade your character, if you can at all. Maybe just your stamina, health, and so on naturally go up per level, but it seems like one of those moments there where if you had the right build of a character, you could have actually pushed through that door and maybe found another exit. And I thought that was interesting to see in this game, because it doesn't seem like the type of RPG where it's all about building out your character with perks and skills. I don't think it's going to be that type of RPG. I think it's going to be more story-driven RPG with little supplemental buffs and equipment customization, of course, being the most prevalent thing there. But those are 11 little details with some other little tidbits scattered throughout for you on Dying Light 2's big gameplay drop. I promised you guys I'd be here for it because I uploaded a Star Wars video right as this dropped, because I honestly forgot originally it was coming. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found this helpful, and if there's anything else in this gameplay that maybe I missed, do fire away with that in the comments down below. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below, along with my Patreon. Do consider supporting that, as it fuels all the content I create here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.